So every artist has a unique path. What led you to painting and making art, and your chosen medium of watercolor for the paintings included in this series?
The watercolors are more like notes prior to making the big paintings, which are the major works in the show. But I actually came to being an artist when I was 3 years old, when I had Canadian relatives who sent me a giant box of coloured crayons. And I got this box and I went to my bedroom and I didn't have paper, so I drew on the walls. And evidently nobody was watching me because I finished the drawing. And then there was a big uproar.
Oh no.
But anyway, that was a start. And then the next day, there was paper. And in the way in which you're a small child, you don't know where it came from, but there it is. So after that, I was drawing all the time.
And maybe you don't remember, but I'm just curious, were your subjects always the same? What were you drawing?
I drew a lot of people, actually. Yeah, I drew things that I saw.
Ah, just as now.
Yes, just, things that were happening around me, they would get incorporated, yeah. I think it's the difference between looking and seeing. So if you're looking at something, you don't necessarily remember it, but if you're seeing it, you're looking in a different kind of way. So I think I maybe taught myself how to see so that I could remember. So there's two kinds of memory, isn't there? There's immediate memory, which is very factual, and then there's memory which is altered. So I'm probably dealing always with altered memory because it's happening usually sometime later.
Are there any particular artists that have inspired your work or your practice?
When I was a student at Glasgow School of Art, we were sent to Kelvin Grove Museum to make transcriptions of works of art in the museum. And one day we were all there, and suddenly there was a terrific noise of someone running. And this guy ran around the balcony and slashed Salvador Dali painting of Crucifixion. Oh, wow. And we all stopped drawing. And after that, I went into the first gallery to get away from the noise because the police were arriving. And I saw my first Giovanni Bellini. And I was staggered, astonished by the movement of the hand to the foot of the child between the Madonna and child. The space was electrifying and the colour was fabulous. So he was my first influence. And shortly afterwards, I saw my first abstract expressionist show in London, and that was William de Kooning. And his gestures were just astonishing to me, the confidence of his gesture. And so in a way, these two influences, which might seem terribly far apart, not really, because they were both about this use of space and what you do in the interval, the negative space. And that was what astonished me about de Kooning as well.
I feel like these types of themes also appear in some of your other work. For example, the Grand Canal, where you have many figures moving throughout the space, each of them kind of engaging with one another, but also engaging separately to convey a connected narrative. Do you have more to say about the influences in that painting?
Yes. By the time I made this painting, I was aware that the waters were rising. And I noticed one day they'd risen really very steeply, and it wasn't the Aqua Alta season. And so I was looking at climate change. I'm an observer. And so I was looking at this, and then I saw a young man basically dive out of his bedroom window and swim across a canal. And then sometime later I saw a gondola going straight in to the ground floor of a palazzo. And these are things that you don't see on an everyday basis. And then I went to Tintoretto because he painted the Massacre of the Innocents. And it seemed to me that in many ways Venice was heading towards that as a scenario if climate change wasn't checked. And so I incorporated a scene from the Tintoretto where a woman is being rescued, in this case from the water. And then I went to Paestum, and there was a painting of a diver on a tomb, on the lid of a tomb, and it was by a Greek artist, and he was diving from life into death. So I used these references in that particular painting.
Can you describe your process when creating a painting? And has this process shifted over time, especially in relation to depicting Venetian subjects?
I think what's been constant about it is that I don't begin work until I'm astonished by something that I've seen. And then the idea begins to germinate. So I do a lot of brooding after the point of seeing something that astonishes me. And then I started to use watercolor about maybe 15 years ago. I was in Vermont at that time, and I met an artist called George Perlman. And he said to me, "You're going to Venice, you have to take watercolor." And I said, "No, I can't use watercolor, I've never used it." And I said, "Anyway, it's a nightmare, isn't it?" And he said, "Oh, you'll be fine." And he gave me my first set of watercolor paints, and it was the best quality. So I had to use it. So I got to Venice and feeling kind of lost because I don't know how to use watercolor. And as he said, "It'll be fine."
It'll be fine. But do you feel that when you first arrived in Venice that you did have any challenges with watercolor? Because I remember you mentioning you produced a very large work on Japanese paper, a roll of Japanese paper, and I know that you had some challenges, trials and tribulations with that work.
Yes. So some years ago, one of the first things I did in Venice was to make a 20-foot long watercolor. And each day I would go out on the streets, and very early morning, and I would make one or two and add it to the roll, because it takes a long time for paintings to dry if it's watercolor. So I did all this, and then I finished that particular watercolor, and sometime later I was in Venice and I was touching up on it, and I was on the Rialto Bridge and it fell into the water, and that particular scroll got blown away in the water, and I could see it unfolding. And if I'd thought quicker, I should have photographed it, and I didn't. So my second attempt was to go back to the places that I'd been to. So I made that long watercolor. But in general, I make watercolors in the form of notes, which I will then surround myself with when I'm back in the studio making a big painting of oil on canvas.
And do you preserve those kind of notes of watercolors as well?
I would say about 1/3 of them probably survive. The rest I will destroy because I don't like the look of them.
How did Venice become a central theme in your work, and at what point did climate change emerge as a central subject?
So I actually went to Venice to look at the relationship between women and their dogs, because I had noticed on my many trips to Venice that little lap dogs, handbag dogs, were very, very popular amongst Venetian women. And I wanted to know why that was, and was I right? Did every woman have a small dog? So I went back to Venice to find out, and that's when I made the long scroll painting. And I began to notice things like if the woman was crossing the canal and she was standing up in a traghetto, because everybody stands up in one of those to cross the canal, that the oarsmen, the gondoliers, were having a very tough time. And I wondered why, and then I noticed that the water was particularly strong. The currents were very strong. And then the Venetians told me that, with climate change, the waters had started to rise.
I'm thinking specifically about one of your works, Stato da Màr, and how that might kind of fit into this narrative that we're discussing now, this integration of women, their stories in Venice, and then how climate change fits into that context.
Right. So Stato da Màr, and it means Empire of the Seas. So Venice had this fabulous naval fleet, and it controlled the Adriatic. And so it had this empire, which was the Empire of the Sea. And so one night, and I'm looking around, and I saw a small dog, which had become isolated on a pillar. It was right on the edge, and it was definitely not able to get off. And I thought, rising waters again. So while I was figuring out what to do, round the bend came a gondola with two women in it, and they were looking for the dog because they were calling out. And then they saw it, and they came in and swooped in and rescued the dog. So the dog was black and white, but that didn't fit with the painting. So I went to Carpaccio, and I took one of his dogs, and I gave it a necklace because I noticed that he gave necklaces to his dogs, some of them. And so I gave it a very nice necklace. So that's how that painting, Stato da Màr, came about. But that's when I first had to deal with the problem of water as form.
Right.
Because water has form, but it's also primeval and it's shifting and changing all the time. It's amorphous. So I had to deal with that problem in that dark painting. And I was thinking, when I was making it, of Poussin. And Poussin made a very, very dark painting, which I always liked. And I noticed that in exhibitions, people would ignore it. They would go straight past it and would go for one that was easier on the eye.
Right.
So I thought I'd like to make a painting that's not that easy to look at.
So did you take out your kind of watercolors and begin work right there on the bridge, or did you then go back to your studio and think more about
I began
how to
on the
depict
bridge.
it?
I began on the bridge, but I didn't include the dog because I was looking more at the water
The
itself.
water as form.
And in fact, in this exhibition, the original watercolor, which is now owned by a woman in London, so it's a private collection, is going to be in the show. She's loaning it.
Oh, wonderful.
So the title of the show is Stato da Màr, and she has the original watercolor from way back.
That you made?
Yes,
in
that I
moment?
made. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And do you find, using that particular work, just kind of thinking more about water as form, did you find it was easy for you to, in the end, as you thought more about it, to depict water as form, or did you kind of have to sit there and think more about the way that you wanted to present it, how it would appear on the canvas? What was the kind of process of that?
Well, once I've had the idea for the image content, then I put that aside completely, because from that moment on, what interests me is the making of a painting. So I'm looking at colour, shape, form, composition, structure. And so water as form then becomes, in a way, the subject of that painting as much as the image content.
Very true, absolutely.
And it was very, very painful process trying to figure out how to paint water. Because sometimes what's on the surface is all you see, but other times you can actually see layers. And especially if the water is moving, you can actually see a foot or so underneath it. So you've got all these levels at which you can approach it. And yes, it's tough painting water.
And you returned to it many times, that particular work?
Because what is Venice if not water?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this interview is hosted at the University Women's Club, where your impressive painting White Gondola is displayed behind us. This work captures women within the Venetian landscape and their relationship to rising water levels. I guess this is a great time to ask, do you view your practice in constant change or flux? I think thinking about the White Gondola in contrast to Stato da Màr, if you will, there's a wonderful different variation of how you're depicting water in these contexts and the way you're thinking about water. I mean, do you see your artistic relationship with Venice and its environment shifting in the long term, just as it kind of has in the context of this series?
With Venice, you don't ever say goodbye. It's really become part of your painting DNA.
Thank you very much for your time. It was wonderful chatting with you.
Thank you for talking to me.